I really want to talk to you about not just your future projects. Let's definitely talk somewhat about what you're kind of doing moving into the future, but then also maybe a little bit more, kind of a lens, if you will, of kind of how storytelling, myth making, digital stuff, even using some of those technologies to capture this, and then not just capture, highfalutin society, academia, whatever, but then, Joe Brewer down in Bariacha, Colombia, he's still writing on the internet and taking pictures and stuff. So and then you in Colombia, et cetera, et cetera. So let's,
yeah.
So
yes, so basically, my bachelor's level thesis paper was about political mimesis, which is basically like, how do you, brought on by documentary films, and the film I was talking about was An Inconvenient Truth. And the idea was, I did a reception history, which is, how are people receiving this movie? Like, what's happening in the real world as a result of this film? And at that time, this organization, MoveOn.org, was a big organization, and people were planning house parties where they screened the film and then discussed it, and then met other people. And I went to a lot of these house parties and interviewed people, and I went to the opening screening of the film, and Al Gore was there, and I think like Leonardo DiCaprio was there, and I had this really curious perspective about how film makes change in the world, and like what is actually happening when people are sitting in this dark room and their brains are turning, and then they leave the dark room. It's almost like Allegory of the Cave, out into the real world, and like the flickering on the screen, how does it relate to what's outside the cave? And I think, to me, what's most powerful about film and really good storytelling is what it makes you do, how it makes you relate to the world outside of the dark room. And like, to me, the interesting and potentially impactful or impacting social change aspect of media in general is, how do we get people to then like really go do stuff or relate to the world differently as a result of having seen this film? I also think in general, there's way too much of an emphasis on storytelling or narrative making, as if me telling the story in this way would make people think about narratives in some certain way. Like basically the way I think narratives get constructed is, people have experiences and then they construct stories backwards. Usually they try to make sense of it. Something weird happened, and then they'll be like, yeah, this thing happened, must have been blank. They'll come up with some sort of explanation. Very rarely do we get to implant the way in which people think about stories. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a top-down elite way of thinking about things. Like, we just need to make people, and I hear this a lot in sociology groups, we just need to make people think like turning off the water when they brush their teeth is cool, or something like that. That's the level they're working at. You know what I mean? They just need to think flying is horrible or eating meat is horrible. We need to change the narrative. And it's like this very top down, like, we need to make them think something is good or bad. And I personally think the more impactful, I wouldn't even say the right way, but probably the more impactful thing is to get people to have experiences. This is why I run the field school like this. Get them to have some experience. And that experience can be a film.
Yes.
And then to explain it to them backwards, to help them to make sense of it. So like when the students are with the student group, or the student groups are with the agroecological farmers, they're like, I don't understand this. And then I'll be like, the reason they're doing this is because they're building topsoil and increasing biodiversity, and they're really care about these things. So I help them to make sense of it looking backwards, and then they can say to themselves, like, these are the real change makers, like these are the people we need to be looking to for environmental solutions, because I helped them to make sense of that experience. Same thing with film. I think if you can help people to integrate their experience or their thought back into what is something that I can then apply to my real life, or what are the takeaway points? Like, if I were to say anything, and we can get into this, primed for it already, like the takeaway points to anyone listening to me, like the whole point of me being out there doing things on Twitter, doing podcasts, and ideally our film is to get people to integrate this particular experience, this particular conversation, to think, what is my thing that I love?
Yeah.
What is
So
my thing that I can do, that I can move toward? And I also really, really advocate for people to find other people who love the thing they love.
Yeah,
I think that in my dissertation research, all these people who started keeping chickens, they found one another in Chicago, and then they started the Chicago Chicken Coop Tour.
Amazing.
And then all these other people came to visit their coops, and there will be kids, and they're like, "Oh my God, chickens! I've never seen this before. I've grown up in Chicago my whole life."
And a movement is born.
And then it's like amazing. And then all these other chicken keepers come check out other chicken keepers' backyards, and there's like, "Where did you get this coop?" Or "What did you think of doing things this way?" And blah blah blah. And then you're like, "Oh man, wait, you have bees too? How does that work?" And then it becomes this thing, like, and it really is a thing where you not only make friends, you admire other people's work, who do things that you like to do too. And people just want excuses to get together. And then once you have this community of people, they'll really go to bat for one another, and they'll really take care of one another. And I think fundamentally what most of us are just seeking is belonging,
belonging is huge. Yeah.
And meaning, and so I think if the goal of a film is to show the ways in which I've found meaning and belonging, to empower you to find meaning and belonging, and it's really simple, straightforward, do something practical. There was this thread on Twitter from this guy Mashton Timmy, who was talking about building or brewing beer with his friends. He's from Michigan.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was just doing something that he likes to do with 5 friends, and the way he talked about it, it was like, it literally brought tears to the eyes of many of the people who read it, because it was just like, that's all we're looking for, is just connection and belonging, meaning, making things, doing something with your hands that results in some real thing. So to me, if any of this, the Doomer Optimism film, the tweeting, any of it leads to helping people like find that, or at least just take a step onto that path, that would be the goal.